Iowa's being aggressive in the transfer portal, maybe a little too aggressive, but is it enough to catch Penn State?
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
You are locked on to college wrestling, and thank you so much for checking out this Locked On crossover featuring Locked On Nittany Lions and Locked On Hawkeyes. I'm Zack Seyko of Locked On Nittany Lions. He is Trent Condon of Locked On Hawkeyes. And, well, Iowa's being aggressive in the transfer portal again, but it's necessary to keep up with and maybe catch up and pass Penn State. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Also, the debate around the transfer portal aggression, because West Virginia called out Iowa. West Virginia coaches named Iowa saying, you're coming after our wrestlers. So is there a matter of ethics here? And then AJ Ferrari's been linked to Oklahoma State. He's been linked to Penn State as well. But does he still end up at Iowa at the end of the day? Today's show is brought to you by 5-Hour Energy. Head over to 5hourenergy.com to find over 15 flavors to choose from. Do you need one now? Grab a 5-Hour Energy shot at your local grocery or convenience store. Stock up today and stay energized. If you're new to our channels, make sure you subscribe to each of the YouTube channels and wherever you get your podcasts. Let us know your thoughts down in the comments section. Trent, Iowa's made some really solid moves, and they're linked to some other wrestlers as well. They did land Nasir Bailey and Jordan Williams as a package duo from Arkansas Little Rock. Those are instant All-America contenders. Nasir Bailey seems like he's going to project at 141. Williams will stay put at 149. So you definitely get a little more production at those weight classes, or there's not necessarily a drop-off. So you get more production at 141, not so much of a drop-off with losing Kyle Parko at 149. So Iowa's right there, and then they're linked to Dean Peterson, 125 wrestler, formerly from Rutgers. Jory Volk ended up at Minnesota, so Iowa is continuing to add these All-America caliber wrestlers, and maybe they just need some better coaching to potentially maybe put them in a title conversation. I don't know that it's enough to catch Penn State, but how does Iowa feel about it?
You know, there is a lot of excitement. And Zach, when you go through and you kind of look at them, Nasir Bailey, I think a lot of people anticipated something like that could be in the works. And when you bring in a guy like that, you get excited. But then Jordan Williams, there was some talk that maybe they were going to go their separate ways. Very quickly, you found out that wasn't the case. But you talked about kind of the background of both those guys. Bailey, an All-American 2 years ago, back in 2024, when he finished fourth. He's got a couple of years of eligibility. I understand that there is some frustration and some frustration from other fan bases, even frustration inside the Iowa fan base about, well, why do we have to do things this way? I go back to the reason that you have to do it this way is because Penn State has broken the paradigm, right? The Nittany Lions, what they have created, this juggernaut, you can't compete with them just trying to build up on your own. It doesn't work. And because of that, this is what Iowa has to do. Will it work? Well, we'll talk about that and give our thoughts on it. But this is the only path. This is the only realistic path to be able to, within the next couple of years, hopefully be able to track down Penn State.
So you think they would need Dean Peterson? They can't go back to Joey Cruz at 125. I mean, in respect to next season, look, I'm all for, development. I thought Joey Cruz showed a lot of promise. He did end up in the top 20 at one point, tough postseason, but there was at least potential. And I feel like another off season to go through the rigmarole and everything, and then Joey Cruz becomes a solid lightweight for them that eventually will hit his peak, but people are probably not going to agree with me.
Well, and the thing, Zach, that I was like, okay, you're going to have to retool some things, but what they did in the portal, they're going to be able to go out there, not pick and choose whoever they want, but with their NIL budget, they're going to be able to go out there and at minimum get a couple of All-Americans that come in. You're hoping guys that can be on the contention for a national championship. But then Penn State on top of it, they go out and not just bring in Rocco Welsh, but also bringing in Ono. And it's like, all right, here we go again. Just when you think, and you see all these guys finally moving on from Penn State, finally, maybe there is a path. Oh, they go out and are doing some of the same things that Iowa is.
Well, I'm glad that you bring that up because, Drake Ayala is going to be there at 133. Drake Ayala helped recruit Nasir Bailey. He recently said that in an interview with Justin Bash. So Iowa is trying to do what it can. When I look at 141, okay, if that's where Bailey's ultimately going to end up, and then he also mentioned that he has a red shirt on the table as well because he's never wrestled at 141. He's always been a 133 guy. So I was intrigued. Maybe Ayala goes to 141, and then Bailey is at 133. Either way, I don't know that you necessarily go wrong with it. But you mentioned Ono. Ono could be at 133.
Yep.
He still hasn't wrestled folk style, so we got to see there. He's got a red shirt available to him. That would shock a lot of people if Ono ends up taking the red shirt. I'm just saying it's possible, and it's on the table. Braden Davis is still in the mat room. Aaron Nagau's still in the mat room. Marcus Blaze is going to join the mat room. He's defeated former NCAA finalists, NCAA All-Americans at the high school. When he was wrestling in the high school level, he went to these tournaments and defeated NCAA wrestlers, All-America finalists, you name it. Blaze has even wrestled Ono. Ono defeated him, but what your point is, Penn State's loaded. Luke Lillidahl's still at 25, so whether it's Joey Cruz, now I know Dean Peterson did defeat Lillidahl.
Yeah.
But that was a different version. That was a younger, inexperienced version of Lillidahl, not the same version of Lillidahl that took third place. Third place and pinned Matt Ramos at the NCAA tournament. So it's not enough. The Hawkeyes are going to have to do more. We're going to talk about AJ Ferrari. They would, if we're talking about the difference between winning and competing with Penn State, you need to go get Ethan Miller at 157. You need to go get a Dean Peterson at 125. You would need to bring back AJ Ferrari, maybe swallow your pride here and say, we got to do what we can if they really are intent on competing with the Nittany Lions.
We know Dean Peterson, he doesn't like Penn State. And he's made some comments.
Is that right?
he's made some comments letting that hashtag F Penn State, and there was a little bit more than just the F that went along with that one. After he went into the portal, and right away somebody of Penn State fans said, "I'd say Penn State, but he wouldn't be able to wrestle." And he said, "Well, your starter's 0-1 against me." So Dean Peters, this is the thing though. This sport, with what Penn State is, that's okay. I mean, sometimes you got to poke the bear, right? You have to go after. Yeah. And I liked Gabe Arnold and talking. Yes, we didn't get to see him on the mat. And we talked about that at the time, but a little bit more flavor, a little bit more intrigue. We're still talking about a sport that's a niche sport, right? We're not talking about, this is not football. This is not men's basketball. This is a sport that still needs growth in order to get deeper into the sports lexicon every single year. And because of that, these kind of things, these kind of background stories that in the grand scheme of things don't matter. You go out on the mat, you go one-on-one, and then you decide it in the 7 minutes. However, these are the things that can prop your sport up and build a bigger fan base.
It is condensing, though. It's really just Penn State, Iowa, and Oklahoma State, because they're the schools that have positioned themselves to be aggressive when it comes to and spend the necessary resources, because if you don't know, wrestling is not a profitable sport. It does not make money. So you are pulling from other parts of the athletic program to make sure that because wrestling means something in Pennsylvania. Wrestling means something in Iowa. Wrestling means something to Oklahoma State specifically, because the state of Oklahoma, then the Sooners would be here, right? No, it means something specifically to Oklahoma State. So other schools are going to have to really start getting this aggressive. Ohio State, Michigan, schools that financially can compete, but it's a shame because I wonder is Northern Iowa able to keep up? Is Arkansas Little Rock able to keep up because they just lost to perennial All-Americans, maybe fringe national title contenders to Iowa, because at the end of the day, they couldn't outbid for NIL. And Iowa does, for what it's worth, have better research. I don't know. Some people might debate me and say that, no, Arkansas Little Rock gave them their start, gave them the development, the coaching. So we'll see how it translates to Iowa after Ja'Cory Teamer and Kyle Parco did not exactly live up to expectations. But is there a sense of...
Injuries, though.
Yes, injuries. Yes. Injuries, that is fair. Especially in Ja'Cory Teamer's case, dealt with it all season. So appreciate that. The transfer portal chaos, though, not only on Penn State's side of it, but West Virginia calling out Iowa, saying that you can't directly contact our wrestlers, but no shame anyway. So is there a sense in etiquette being too aggressive, and does Iowa need to be tamed here when it comes to the transfer portal discussions? We're going to discuss that coming up next on this Locked On Crossover. And today's episode is brought to you by Fabric. Life moves fast, especially when you have a family. One day you're watching your kids take their first steps, and before you know it, they're off to college. That's why securing their future is so important. Fabric by Gerber Life makes it simple to get term life insurance that fits your family's needs. With Fabric, you can apply for term life insurance online right from your couch. You can be covered in under 10 minutes, and in many cases, no health exam is required. You'll get peace of mind. As a parent, you want to make sure your family is financially protected no matter what happens. Fabric gives you that peace of mind. You'll also get affordable coverage. You can get $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day, so protecting your loved ones doesn't have to break the bank. And it goes beyond life insurance. Fabric also offers free digital wills and access to investment accounts to help you plan for your children's future. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their families. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. That's meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company. Not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. Today's episode is also brought to you by Prize Picks. Baseball season is in full swing, and there's no better way to get in on the action than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With Prize Picks, you pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. Whether it's strikeouts, RBIs, or first inning runs, Prize Picks keeps every game exciting. You get to customize your lineup. So if you're looking at Prize Picks this week, you can pick players like Aaron Judge for more than 1 home run or Shohei Ohtani for more than 1 stolen base. It's that easy, and it's fast and simple. Setting up a lineup takes less than 60 seconds, and when you win, the payout is quick, safe, and secure. And you'll get exclusive promos. Take advantage of things like Taco Tuesday, where Prize Picks offers discounts on select player projections for even more value. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That is code LOCKEDONCollege for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That is Prize Picks. Run your game. All right, let's jump back into it with West Virginia just calling out Iowa on social media, saying that you're trying to target our wrestlers, whether that maybe it's a Jet Strickenberger at 125, but specifically Peyton Hall. Peyton Hall was named. I'm just saying it because Iowa needs a 125 and a 157 pounder based on the way that they have behaved. And then we'll also talk about Zach Ryder, Rocco Welsh, and everything here, because Penn State certainly had its own transfer portal drama. Trent, is there a fine line that Iowa needs to follow or doesn't need to follow? Look, let me put it this way. They're not going to follow any sort of unwritten rule here, and I don't blame them because the NCAA is spineless, and anything that they're going to try to say and do, they're just going to get run into court. So this is the wild, wild west. It's still going to be that way. So Iowa, do they need to have shame here for trying to gauge some interest and share some NIL ideas? Look, is it unethical? To an extent, yes. Yes, it is. But nothing's going to stop them.
This is the world of college athletics that we're living in, though. And if you believe that all these players that enter the portal, not just wrestling, but enter the portal for basketball, for football, and they enter with a no contact tag, what does that mean? They already know where they're going because the conversations have all happened. It's just wrestling keeping up with everybody else. I mean, that's what it is. It is an incredibly dirty business. This is the reality. One pushback, though, from the West Virginia side. All right. So you have this ammunition, right? You're going to go after you, in fact, tag in the tweet, Hawks Wrestling. But you didn't name that individual coach. If you think you got ammunition here, then go say it. We've seen coaches in other sports do that and go out and call the coaches out by name. If you got a name them. If not, shut up. That's how I feel. Is it a booster?
Is it a booster, though, working behind the scenes?
Well, and that's okay because all those things are above the board. He said coach, and he said whatever a coach is doing it. If it's a coach, then name them. If it's a agent, if it's somebody involved with the collective, that is all above the board because we do not have parameters. We do not have guidelines that were put in by the NCAA. If you got a name them. If not, West Virginia, shut up.
It's also, I mean, nobody forces anybody to go into the transfer portal.
Nope.
Nobody forces anybody to commit to Iowa. Nobody forces anybody to commit to Penn State or leave Penn State. So I think I'm willing to take the middle ground in all of this, right? Yes, it's unethical if you're going after wrestlers that aren't in the portal and trying to say, hey, we just want to educate you about our NIL opportunities here in the great state of Iowa for the Hawkeyes Wrestling program. Okay, but You also don't have to listen to them. You don't have to pick up the phone. And until the NCAA does something different to neutralize all of this, then that's the issue that I have, is that if there's an issue with it, do something about it. So the bigger story here is that the NCAA just let everything run out of control. So the problem isn't Iowa. The problem is that, as we've talked about here, no guidelines, no standards, nothing, and everybody else is doing it. So why is Iowa the exception?
Yeah, and they're going to get the arrows because they have an NIL budget. Again, it's about chasing down Penn State. That's what this whole conversation is about.
Dang it, Penn State.
It is. But, I had somebody was doing on one of the message boards. I saw a post. Imagine that Iowa, was able to get Spencer Lee at his peak. And he put Kyle Dake in the lineup. And there was one more national champion. They pinned their way to a championship. They still wouldn't have had enough to beat Penn State this year. I mean, that's what you're going through when you're trying to chase down. You're talking about having 5 finalists, having 4 champions in there, and it still wouldn't be enough because of the depth of what we saw from this Penn State lineup. That is the new reality. So do you have to cut some corners? Do you have to do some things? Do you have to do some things that you could look at is unethical? But yes, there is a trophy for second place, but nobody cares. Nobody is celebrating second place at the University of Iowa for their wrestling program. Nobody's celebrating a 4th place trophy. All that matters is number 1. And there's one way to do it. More talent. Coach them up, all those different things. Zach, I'm sure you see all the cliches, right? Of what you got to do to do it. It ultimately comes down to talent. And without talent, you're not beating Penn State.
So I guess that's the grievance that I have here with Iowa. When I'm looking at it as just a neutral situation, no allegiance to Penn State here. I'm not a Penn State podcast host, but speaking freely, is that at some point you're going to have to pay the piper if you're Iowa. And does it hurt recruiting in the long run where, yes, you're going to get the Bo Bassett's and the Angelo Ferraris, maybe get the AJ Ferraris, but that's the transfer portal. I'm talking about recruiting specifically, is that you alienated the Sebrecks, maybe a Joey Cruz down the line, where guys were ultimately pushed out. And I know there were some other wrestlers because in order to make room for Stephen Buchanan, Kyle Parko, you have to push others out that gave their blood, sweat, and tears to an Iowa program. If you were a high school senior, and I can't imagine that you consider Iowa anymore because you don't know if they're going to stab you in the back. And that's what it was at the time. To go get Buchanan, to go get Parko, it was a backstabbing.
So there's 2 ways to look at it. And I completely understand your thought process behind that is those young guys that are building themselves up, the old backbone of what Iowa wrestling once was. And in general, collegiate wrestling once was, and doing that. But we also have to remember the new limits that are happening in rosters. And some of those fringe guys, those guys that you probably wouldn't see until their junior year on a varsity mat out there. Those guys that, hey, maybe you're an All-American as a junior, first time full-time and then a senior, you're hoping to be somebody that can get to Saturday night, in wrestling for a championship. Those guys fall by the wayside. But here's the thing. Go out and go to a UNI. Go to a West Virginia. Go to basically any other program outside of the big 3 that we've talked about. Go earn your stripes there and then come back and earn your money at a place like in Iowa. That's the way you have to do it. But what Penn State have? 40-some guys on the roster this past season. Well, 30 is going to be the limit next year. And how that's going to look. There's going to be a trickle-down effect that is going to impact things. I was not going to bring in those same kind of fringe guys. Neither is Penn State, those guys that were a big part of the wrestling room. It's disappointing. And I've known plenty of people that never wrestled a varsity match for Iowa wrestling, but good friends of mine, but they were on the team, and that was important. The sad thing is when we're talking about this all encompassing, those guys are not going to have that opportunity anymore.
The same thing. I'm glad you brought up the roster limits, because that's why Penn State has finally seen this exodus, if you will, that Cale Sanderson has actually been really good. One of the best at managing a roster that, guys are never going to see an opportunity in the collegiate lineup, but gosh darn it, they just want to go out there and scrap and be in the best mat room in the country. And so where the NCAA gets it right, and hey, you increase the scholarship limit, you're going to have up to 30 scholarship athletes on a wrestling team. It goes from 9.9 to, no, I don't think anybody's, unless you know differently, Trent, I don't think Iowa's going to carry 30 either. It's going to be in that 20 to 25 range. I could see Iowa, all right, is Penn State carrying 20? We'll carry 21, something like that.
Right.
But that's why we're seeing that, is that now you can actually go get a scholarship somewhere else, but you also, if you do want to sacrifice that and give that up, you can't be in the Penn State mat room unless you make the top 30. Same with Iowa. So that's why Alex Facundo and Aurelius Dunbar and Gary Steen and Penn State diehards are going to recognize most of those names. Alex Facundo, of course, was a starter once upon a time, and he'll probably start at Oklahoma State here. But Zach Ryder's now in that too. He's entered into the transfer portal. Rocco Welsh comes in, and yeah, you have to make some sacrifices at the end of the day.
So one question I had for you, Zach, is
Absolutely.
I've heard a lot of people talk about, obviously, the $20.5 million that's going to be handed out from each athletic department. Iowa's going to fully fund it. I'm going to guess most everybody in the Big Ten is going to be able to fully fund that $20.5 million a year that's going to go to the student athletes. About 75 to 80% will go to football. Mm-hmm. We're having the conversation. Iowa with a new men's basketball coach with Ben McCullum. They have really worked to build up their NIL funds on that front. You know, women's basketball, an important one for Iowa after the runs from Caitlin Clark the last couple of years. They're well funded on that one. Is how much of that money, how much of that 20.5 is going to be allocated to wrestling? And because Iowa's NIL funds are so good, I think that's kind of a reason for it. There's a real possibility that they're not going to spend any of that money, any of that max $20.5 million. None of it is going to go to wrestling from Iowa. Some people push back on that, say, you know, it might be $1 million. Regardless, do you know on the Penn State side kind of what they're thinking, and if any of the money is going to be out of that big chunk is going to go to the wrestling program?
To my understanding right now, I can't say this with 100% accuracy though, even though I should, and I'm going to get to the bottom of that. So I'm glad that, you know, that's why we have these conversations and these discussions to investigate these things. To my understanding, all 20 and a half is going to football. That's
see, and I don't know. That's the other part.
But I might be wrong there, because men's basketball needs just a boost. They need something. Wrestling's obviously very prioritized, but I know that select programs, particularly wrestling in this case, have private donors that support the program through NIL and funding the program. Penn State spends the most money of any athletic department when it comes to the even outspends Iowa. I think the total was $3 million to Iowa's 2.5, 2.6. You can do a lot with $400K.
Yeah. And we've definitely seen that. So you mentioned the full allotment going to football. I believe they're trying to stay away from that, because then you get into antitrust things, and that's why they're saying probably 75 to 80% will go to football.
That would be
the cap.
Yeah. It's not so much about, okay, I think the way I read it, because there was an article and I can't quote it directly, but it's that they're going all into as much as the limits will let them. So if that's 85%,
yep.
So maybe
Iowa will do the same. Yep.
Yeah. I'm misunderstanding 20 and a half is available, but 20, whatever the maximum amount of that 20 and a half can go to football, that's what's going to go to football, because football is king. We know, and you don't have a wrestling program without a solid football program. Yeah. You don't have a football and men's basketball because of the TV contracts. They're self-sustainable. We saw the wrestling ratings. It's just not, it's a negative. It's a loss. It operates at a loss, but it is what it is. But you got to grow the sport. So do things to grow the sport to make it financially profitable. AJ Ferrari talks about that. Ferrari's been linked to Penn State, linked to Oklahoma State. I have some sources that go contrary against the whole Penn State AJ Ferrari rumors. At the end of all this, could he end up back at Iowa? We're going to discuss that to finish up this Locked On crossover coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Daylight savings snuck up on us again. And if you're feeling that lost hour of sleep, 5 Hour Energy has your back. The extra sunshine means more time for fun, but sometimes you need a little boost to power through. Whether you're staying up late to watch some of these NCAA tournament games, or you're squeezing in a round of golf after work, or you're just trying to keep up with your busy day, 5 Hour Energy gives you that quick, refreshing pick-me-up whenever you need it. Through all the basketball madness, you're going to be staying up late to watch some of this tournament action, and 5 Hour Energy will help you keep up with the next day. Extra daylight means extra activities with longer days, and if you love getting outside to go for a hike or go for a run, you can get a quick boost from flavors like Tropical Burst. It's the on-the-go convenience. Whether you're traveling for an event, going to a game, 5 Hour Energy is easy to grab and keeps you feeling refreshed. Head over to 5hourenergy.com and find over 15 flavors to choose from, including watermelon, blue raspberry, and peach mango. You can even build your own 12 or 24 pack delivered right to your door. Do you need one now? Grab a 5 Hour Energy shot at your local grocery or convenience store. They're everywhere. Stock up today and stay energized with 5 Hour Energy.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the bracket breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
AJ Ferrari is a polarizing figure with any destination between Penn State and I was absolutely floored when I saw the initial report that AJ Ferrari and Penn State have been in contact. AJ and Ferrari and Oklahoma State have been in contact. That's where a lot of those off the mat issues happened. That's where it all started. David Taylor's new to the coaching ranks. Why would you bring him back? And then Iowa just didn't sit right with the fans between some discourse, some decisions, and
a double bird.
Else. Yes, the double bird. It became. Not everybody was on the same team. You're here to support Iowa, but everything became a mercenary type of instance. Look, I want to give everybody the benefit of the doubt, second chances and everything like that. I'm not here to discuss AJ Ferrari. We're here to discuss AJ Ferrari and where he ultimately ends up. It's not going to be at Oklahoma State because David Taylor's not going to. The risk is not worth the reward. Penn State, same thing. The culture that you built, you also have answers at 197 and heavyweight because people were trying to argue that, well, heavyweight's open. Greg Kirkfleet's gone. He could carry the weight appropriately. He wouldn't have any trouble cutting, and he's so athletic that he would just overwhelm some of the other heavyweights. So be it, but the Mirasola twins are still there. Josh Barr is an option, even though I think he cuts to 184 at the end of the day. That's my opinion. I think Barr goes back to 84 and Mirasola's take over at 97 in heavyweight. So if you bring in AJ Ferrari, who has multiple years of eligibility, you displace all of that. Your lineup plans, everything that you worked for in recruiting, and then the culture and the authenticity that Cale Sanderson has built. Why would you undo all of that because of one wrestler? So Iowa, in a different story, like the whole conversation here has been about what are they willing to do to compete? Is it worth to swallow your pride and say, look, bygones are bygones? AJ Ferrari, you are not an enemy. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. So if Penn State's our number one enemy together and we can use your help to defeat them, then we'll bring you back.
This conversation goes deeper than just the wrestling room. This goes deeper than the Brands brothers making the decision or just Tom on his own making the decision. This goes to Beth Getz, the new athletic director, who people told the Brands in no uncertain terms after the double bird, that is not happening in an Iowa wrestling singlet. That is not happening, certainly for this year, and it's not going to happen. So this is a conversation I think that goes so much deeper than even on the surface level it feels, because there are people in the athletic department, there are school presidents, there are people on the board of regents that say, absolutely not, in no way is this guy. We gave him an opportunity and he left with the double bird. And because of that, there is going to be no second chances. So because of that, I think this is a conversation that can go deeper than any of our understanding. It's not having a contact in the wrestling room or having a contact in the athletic department. This goes so much deeper than that with AJ Ferrari's background, with the charges that have been levied against him, an opportunity that has been given to him before, and then what happened because of it. I think this is going to have some more twists and turns. And when we talk about the big three of Iowa, Penn State, and Oklahoma State, what would be the betting favorite right now? If we talk to our friends over at FanDuel to put up the odds, does he end up at the big three or somewhere else? We put out all the other college programs. I think I might say any other college program would be my betting favorite.
I'd have to go with that too. I know he's been loosely linked to Iowa State. Again, he's been linked everywhere, whether it's, Angelo, his brother's there, right? Angelo Ferrari's at Iowa. So this kind of, brotherly, but as you mentioned, people who have more power than the Iowa coaches, if they say no, then it's simply not it's simply not happening. At Penn State, Oklahoma State, since they operate in terms of integrity, I'm sorry, it's not worth the risk. And again, I get it. He's trying to second chance, better his life. I'm not trying. This isn't a slam dunk opportunity, but actions have consequences. He understands that. He's told us many times in many interviews now. So so now it extends to what program would even take him? Ohio State, Michigan, Iowa State? I don't know. I don't know. I think he's going to end up at another program that, falls along the lines of Cal State Bakersfield, where AJ Ferrari can help you out because you're not a reputable program to an extent. So he basically is going to graduate to a larger version of Cal State Bakersfield. I don't know.
Yeah. Is there somebody in the Big Ten that would make sense? In Ohio State, they have a little money, kind of laying around. Would that be something that would make sense to go that direction? Too bad we didn't have the SEC in wrestling, right? We know they'd be involved. They'd be jumping at it. I think
Texas,
I told you.
Texas A&M.
Absolutely. Yep. I told you, Zach, that my great uncle was a wrestling coach at LSU back in the 70s and early 80s before basically all the SEC disbanded. And just imagining what SEC wrestling would be, that's about growing the sport, though. And no, it's not going to happen in today's environment that we're going to see growth. And unfortunately, that is off the board. But you mentioned the TV ratings a little bit more. I had one final thing for you. And it's about those TV numbers and just where our sport sits. So we have the first and second round of the NCAA tournament happening with college wrestling's biggest event. And I know there's a lot more than just the college schedule, and it pertains to U.S. wrestling schedule and national schedules and things like that. But got to find a way to move this thing. Even if it's a couple of weeks back, moving it even to this weekend, it would be so much better than what it is. And a sport that is in trouble and is continuing to see programs dwindling more and more and more. Something needs to be done, I think, at the forefront. You have to move this off the weekend that it's currently wrestled.
I agree wholeheartedly. I've said that before, probably in some other podcasts. When has the NCAA done something right? I can find thousands. It's easier to find something that they do right as opposed to what they do wrong. They do everything wrong. So you're going up against, your biggest product in March at the time, right? Timing. I know college football reigns supreme, but why do that to yourself? It's because they don't care. At the end of the day, they don't care. It's football, it's basketball, everybody else be damned. And wrestling extends to that because they're not putting up the ratings. You see Penn State versus Iowa, the dual meet itself be comparable to one of the days of the NCAA tournament. Maybe that has to do with March Madness basketball. I can't speak for the casual fan. You and I are too heavily invested in Penn State and Iowa wrestling respectively, so I don't know that I can channel that for myself to say, well, this is what everybody else is thinking, because I was glued to wrestling. I had to be. March Madness, I didn't watch a lot of March Madness, I'll be honest, for basketball. I didn't watch too much of it. Somehow my bracket's doing just fine. All 4 ones made it to the Final Four. Anyway, but that's the thing. I think you do need those, the Dean Peterson, Luke Lillidahl rivalries. You have to, don't go into the WWE route, but you have to create some narratives that are real because it's going to draw interest. That's what it is at the end of the day. Try to manufacture some interest where you can, and maybe that will get you in the right direction, more spot. But the names that control this sport certainly need to show the respect and care that it deserves where other institutions do not, like the NCAA. So that's going to do it for this Locked On crossover. Again, let us know your thoughts down in the comments section. Thank you so much for checking out this episode, either on Locked On Nittany Lions or Locked On Hawkeyes. And for more content around your favorite Penn State and Iowa teams, keep it right here, respectively, on both of our channels, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network.